Okay, well, this is a huge welcome to the Network Effect webinar. I'm very, very pleased to introduce some co-panelists here. Julia Munn, who's from NTT, and Dr. Ryan O'Sullivan, who's from IntraHive. And I'd just first of all like to set a little bit of the context for this event, explaining to you how we come together to host this webinar. We ran, for those of you who know Consalia, the GST event at the end of November last year. And we had a session at the end of GST, which was focused on relationship management. And it provoked a lot of conversation at the event, so much so that we thought it would be great to host a subsequent follow-up. And Julia, who had joined us at GST, had been in contact with Ryan. And as Ryan and I were talking about doing the webinar, and given sort of Julia's interest in the topic, we invited Julia to take part, which is great. Great to have Julia with us as well. So that's how we've come together. Julia is currently doing a master's program. She tells me she's in the final project phase. So well done, Julia. We're talking to her earlier about her doing a doctorate after this, which I'm not sure is on the cards at the moment. Sort of given that both Ryan and I have gone through the pain of doing a doctorate anyway. We thought it would be a good idea for Julia. Anyway, so just to kind of explain the structure of the event and how we would like you, the participants, to take part as well, that we wanted to take the network effect and break it down into three different sections, if you like. How do we build networks around the client? How do we build networks internally around the organizations with whom we work and the ecosystem there? And then finally, we wanted to explore the network effect around what we called external, the broader ecosystem of contacts that we might have that may transcend both our own organization and the clients with whom we actually work. We would love to invite you, as we're going through the webinar, to, if there are any questions you want to pose, please put them in chat. George, who's helping to run the event, will be spotting the questions and putting them through to us. But there will be a Q&A session as well towards the end of the session. So, I mean, clearly, we know how important relationships and networks of relationships are sort of critical to how we can function. But what was really interesting at GST was Ryan, who I would say is probably one of the UK, if not sort of globally recognized as a leading expert in relationship management, actually shared with us some quite interesting statistics about relationships vis-a-vis sales, revenue, loyalty, and so on. And we thought it would be quite a good idea to start this webinar with asking Ryan, if you wouldn't mind, to give us the reason why relationships really matter.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Hi, everyone. Good to meet you all. I hope you enjoyed today. So at the Global Sales Transformation event, there was something that was covered various different subjects. And obviously, I was talking specifically about relationships and how to identify and map relationships, as Phil said. And I tend to start these types of sessions with some of these stats, just to bring some data points to the underlying fact that we all recognize relationships matter, but let's put some quantitative weight behind that. And I'm just going to pick a couple out and just talk them through verbally, and I've sequenced, kind of talk about them sequentially. So there's a bit of a compound. And first one is, how many people, if you think about your existing clients, 83% of them are happy to make an introduction for you. So think about your existing client base, and 4 out of 5 of those people, if they're happy with the service you're delivering, are willing to recommend you to someone else. And then if you add on to that, if you think about what's the likelihood of someone meeting you through a warm introduction versus a cold introduction, the data from my doctorate said that you're 5 times more likely to accept an introduction when it's warm versus cold. And that was research back prior to COVID. And I think, judging by today's standards, I would suggest that's even way higher, maybe even 15 to 20 times more likely to meet you via an introduction versus cold. And then the third one I'm going to mention here is 73% of business executives prefer to work with someone where there's an existing relationship. So all of those three independently are powerful, but if you start to stack them together, you can see what an impact this relationship first approach can have. So you've got 4 out of 5 happy clients are happy to make an introduction. Then you've got, when they do, they're way more likely to accept the introduction from the person you meet them. And then 3 out of 4 of those pretty much will want to work with someone because of that existing relationship. So just bear these type of stats in mind. And I'll leave you with one, which is a really powerful one from a great book that I certainly appreciate. It's Smarter Collaboration with Heidi Gardner. And they did a lot of analysis around networks and collaboration. And what they found is, if you compare like a digital twin, they called it, so very similar people, similar profile, similar background, similar industry focus, if you will. But the only difference that they found was if you had a big network and if you had a small network. And their data showed that the person with the much higher network generates 4 times more revenue than the same person with a very small network. And that goes again as a testament to the fact that, you know, relationships, networks, and collaboration certainly has a fantastic impact, and more today than ever, I'd suggest.
Thank you, Ryan. Actually, I've got a couple of questions I'd like to ask about some of the stats you've just shared. But I think before I ask my questions, I'd like to just come over to Julia if I can. Julia, before I come over to you, could you give some context as to who you are and what your role is at NTT? Because I think that will help the listeners to understand a little bit more, about you, and maybe direct a couple of questions to you. I don't know. But Julia, if you could just tell us a bit about who you are.
Absolutely. And thank you for that introduction, Phil. And yeah, great to be here. So a little bit about myself. I've been in the tech industry, and I started my career actually in the tech industry around 17 years ago. I've been working directly in sales for about 10 years. So, and that's been pretty interesting for me because it's been across multiple geographies, markets, and industries. And I've been pretty much focused on global clients within that space for that time. So that's been really good for me to grasp a good amount of experience in understanding complex global deals. I work for a company called NTT Data. So they're a global tech services and consulting business. I think arguably, we'd like to call ourselves one of the biggest full stack businesses in the market at the moment. And when I talk about full stack, I'm replying to, infrastructure right up to application level. So we can service our customers across that stack, which is fantastic. And, we've got a presence in over 60 countries, and we look after about 75% of the Fortune 100. So truly a global company, and that's afforded me a lot of opportunity to have experience with customers across the globe. So that's me in a nutshell.
So Julia, when you came to the event, and you obviously sort of listened to some of the points that Ryan was actually raising, what resonated with you about some of the messages that Ryan was giving?
Sure. So I think for me, actually contextualizing the value of relationships, because within the business I work in, we do have formats and processes that we run to try and connect our networks and to drive greater collaboration with our customers, whether it's within the customer base, within internally and externally as well. So it was fantastic for me to actually see that being put into a formalized process, and that there's actually a formula bound to that, and that formula creates and gives the evidence that it actually works, which is fantastic for me. The insights that Ryan gave were fantastic, and some really good knowledge share. So really enjoyed that, and that's hence the reason why I connected with him.
That's fantastic. For those of you who may not know, but I think sort of NTT is going through a massive amount of integration at the moment, isn't it? So we'll come on to this, I think, a little bit later on in the context of how do you keep track of relationships in organizations who go through such massive change.
Yes.
And that in itself must be a challenge. But I think we'll talk more about that a little bit later on. But I've noticed in the chat, Ryan, I'm just going to come back to you. We've had the question, please, can we share more background to the stats, the sample type and size? Is that something we can do fairly quickly, or is it something we could do towards the end? What would you...
I can share some. I was just in the background trying to get the YouTube video of the actual session, because we've talked about this famous session a few times today. So I'll share that in the chat. The stat I show on the slide has the sources, but I can certainly reach out to Neil separately and make sure he's got everything he needs.
Okay, so so the background to the data we'll share with you a bit later on, and certainly we'll give you some links as to where you can sort of go and find it. Okay, so Ryan, just sort of coming back to you just for a moment, then, what for you sort of triggered your interest in this particular topic? Because I think you've had a bit like Julia, roles in global account management, and I think there's a particular story that triggered your interest in this, which perhaps we could share.
Yeah. So look, if I describe my evolution, I guess nobody on this call needs to be convinced relationships matter. So we all know that we're all in the positions we are today professionally thanks to our relationships. And then I pursued the doctorate, and it was, well, if relationships matter, what is a good relationship? So I went through 7 years, as you were saying, in the warm-up, arduous work, part-time, to understand what a relationship is. And a lot of that is down to trust and some other stuff. But what I realized as I was coming to the end of that process is that I actually missed a step out. And for me, it's everybody understands relationships matter, but then the next step is, who should I build relationships with? And I think sometimes when we're managing our key accounts, we miss that step. We focus on step 3 in my scenario, which is who do we have good relationships with? But I think if we take a step back and we say, look, this is one of a key account at a company level or in your personal portfolio. Who are the key people that I need to be aware of at the executive level, and then at the key buying persona level across all of the service lines that you have, and get those mapped out? That's sort of step 1. And I think sometimes people miss that step and then tend to focus on, if it's an existing account, where are you working already? Build more relationships there. And so that's why I wrote my book, the Building B2B Relationships. That was the part 2, I guess, to the doctorate. And that is where I feel today the gap exists, is about understanding how to identify and map the key stakeholders at an account level. So hope that answers the question, Phil.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I can see that we've had an interesting sort of question posed here about from Tristan, who says, firstly, I'm a believer in relationship selling, but how do your findings compare to the challenger sale? I could take that question myself, but I don't know if Julia or Ryan would like to take that question.
Yeah, I've certainly got a perspective. So that's one of the books behind me. I'm not sure where it is. I think there's a strong argument there for coming with fresh perspectives, and I can call back to for my doctorate, which I can share as well, the actual thesis in the chat. You can get that online as well. It's available for free. So I interviewed CXOs, and we talked about what was the best relationship they'd ever had in their career. And the people that they described of working with, of all the hundreds of people that interacted with over their careers, there's one person we talked about and what made them special. They were people that were willing to tell them the unvarnished truth, as they called it, were willing to be more aggressive in how they would position the organization and the solutions and the direction of where they would suggest they go. So there is definitely a component there of not being like the other three that they talk about. So the challenger side of being overt, and I think you understand that when you go through the trust equation as well, when you talk about intimacy. And I think, Phil, you talk quite a lot about the self-orientation element of putting yourself in the client's shoes. So all of those things combine, I think, to be able to evaluate what you think is relevant for that particular client, and not being afraid to actually voice that, and being confident in the solutions you'd like to put forward.
Yes, I think there's two sides to when you talk about relationship selling. You've got the extensiveness of your network, within an account. Yeah, and that suggests that you've got some kind of relationship with the right people in the right places in the right kind of geographies. So if we start to talk about relationship selling, you've got a quantity, you've got a number, you've got how extensive is the network, then you've got the quality. And I think there is a type of salesperson that has existed, which is sort of based on relational aspects. It's, they're very easy to talk to. They're not particularly in the challenger work, not particularly challenging. They don't bring sort of fresh insight. So I think that when we talk about relationship selling in the context of the network effect, we're talking about the depth and the breadth of relationships you have within your global accounts. And then you've got well, what do you do with the relationships? How do you use those relationships to kind of bring value, both to the client and to your own business? Julia, I don't know if you've got a point of view on that from your experience and some of the challenges you face in dealing with your global accounts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so it goes back to the value conversation, right? So you walking into a new customer, particularly a global customer, and if you're not able to establish value with that first contact that you have with that customer, I think that's the challenge that you'll face. The right thing is to come in, obviously show the value to that customer, and that customer will then be your, if we can put it, facilitate the internal buy-in and help you up the value chain up to the levels that you need to go, and down that chain as well. So it's creating the value. And how do you create that value? You've got to do your insights, right? You've got to understand that customer business challenge in detail. You've got to, look at it from a 360 perspective. What are the KPIs for that particular individual that you're talking to? What is important to them? How do you help them sort of, move their selves up into the chain, and look good to the executives? So if you're able to create that value for that individual, they will more easily be able to take you up into the opportunity and expand that for you across relationships.
Julie, it sounded from what you're saying earlier that you've got a sort of defined kind of process for doing that within the organization. You may not be able to share it, but it sounds, could you give some indication as the kind of practices that you think lead to the development of the network effect that you might have within your accounts?
So we use a globally recognized model called AIM methodology. I don't know if you've heard about AIM methodology. So that is, it looks at, AIM is the acronym for Access, Insights, and Motion. So when you look at access, you're actually looking to how do you create the right relationships with the right individuals within your within the company or the client, and that talks to the relationship mapping that Ryan's done quite a bit of research on. So it's mapping, and what I like to do particularly with my customers is mapping and understanding exactly who the key stakeholders are, who the influencers are, who the blockers are, who's going to help you up the stack and who's going to hinder you. Map those out, and then I like to sort of map them to sort of the same level within my business. So for example, if it's somebody in risk or compliance? Who can I bring in from my business that can match that level and capability and can help them build across, the argument from a challenge perspective? So I like to map all of them together, and that sort of helps me look at doing the research and understanding the customer a bit more. So that helps in that area. Insight is really, really important. And what's great about NTT Data is that we've got some wonderful platforms and capability and access to information that gives us insight into our customers. One of those is called Client 360. So we're able to pull from various sources on the internet and with, like IDC models, Gartner, that sort of thing. And we can sort of pull a profile together for a customer that helps us analyze where the gap in the market is for us, what conversations we can go in and have, how do we support some challenges that we can see could be a challenge for our customers, and how do we, be able to unpack those with our customers. So that helps a lot. And then obviously it's the motion part of it. So when you're looking at motion, it's how do you create the joint vision with that customer to create if we can say, an engagement that they agree to, that they're going to help you and themselves achieve within the opportunity. So that's really what we look at. And there's actually a really good communicator that I follow. His name is Vinjing, and he said something really, you've got a quote that's really, really interesting. And it's, the acquisition of knowledge brings about the satisfaction. So doing your research, understanding your customer in great detail, and forming those relationships and having them being quite solid is extremely important. It brings the satisfaction to both sides, but it's really the application of that knowledge that brings fulfillment. So what are you doing with that information to bring value to the customer, and then for, so doing, building those relationships and closing deals.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Julia, for sharing. That's really interesting. All sorts of other thoughts that have sort of come to mind, and thank you, Tristan, by the way, for your question. And I mean, it was quite interesting that just connecting it back to my doctorate, which was done some years ago. In fact, my doctorate was published the year that the Challenger Cell came out. So we had both, if you like, both published roughly at the same time. But my research suggested that there were four key values that are really important in building relationships, and they were authenticity. I think, Ryan, you were talking about that sort of, being authentic, acting with integrity. You've got client centricity, which is a no-brainer. Those two are the foundation blocks for building trust and building a trusted relationship. But the two values that are my favorite, and actually the rarest according to the research that I've done, are proactive creativity, is the ability to come up with the ideas for which you need the insights that Julia was mentioning earlier on. How do you develop ideas perhaps before the client is done, but also having the courage to take those ideas and maybe challenge, the customers. So when the Challenger sale came about, I was really excited by the word challenge, except in some connections you could argue it's a slightly negative word. It could be taken the wrong way, to challenge. And there was a lot about provocative selling at one point, which, again, I wasn't too fond of the word, but tactful audacity for me somehow seemed to encapsulate the right way of actually going about being bold with ideas that you've kind of developed. And I guess we're sort of talking about, you've got the quantity, how broad your network is, and you've also got the quality of the relationship network that you have. And we've started to talk about these sort of two elements. Ryan, with the quantity of relationships and just tracking, I mean, sometimes clients are huge and massive. It's not an easy task to track relationships, and clients, I don't know about you, but clients change very quickly. It's really difficult to keep track of where people move, and the decision-making process gets more complicated the more people are involved in making a decision. I think we've seen those stats. So, sorry, Ryan.
Yeah, that's a good framing, Phil. But I think for me, when we talk about collaboration, it starts with, like I said, that so-called missing step around, like, who are the people within. I'm assuming everyone on the call is at least managing some type of key account. So we'll go down that use case path. But you've got the key account. So step one is really identify and map those key executives. So you know who the key movers and shakers are. And then it's about what I call the panning for gold stage, which is, how do we build this collaboration effort, the collaboration network, if you will? And you talked about it at the beginning, Phil. It's around three legs to the stool, if you will. So if you identify who the key people are, so you've got those on some type of list somewhere. Some of them you'll know, most of them you won't, let's assume. But then within the client organization, who else do you have? Who else is important? Who else do you have relationships with? And then within your own organization, often there'll be relationships that exist in the client side, but they'll be held maybe historically within your own organization. So there's a whole bunch of relationship capital that already exists in your own organization, maybe going back years. Maybe you've only taken over that account in the last 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, but it's been an account for 5 years or more. So what's the history there? What are the relationships from the past? What bids have you worked on that you maybe didn't win? All of that is a whole bunch of relationship capital, which can, once it's understood and captured, can be leveraged for collaboration. And then the third leg to the stool there is the external piece. So partners, or maybe people that used to work at the client company now move somewhere else. And there's another facet to that. So these are all people that you can then gather. And as I say, I call this in my book the panning for gold stage, because you need to take the time to actually go through this process of gathering the existing intelligence, or the opportunity for that intelligence. And then that becomes your strategy, and that becomes the catalyst for collaboration. And obviously you can start internally in various ways with your own CRM system. You can look at previous bids. You can figure out from tribal knowledge different people that have been working on the accounts. You've got to go through that process. Obviously, I'm biased with software like IntroHive that can help do that automatically and historically. And I know we've got some IntroHive clients on the call, so they agree with what I'm suggesting here, is to capture that knowledge and then be able to leverage it. So which knowledge actually is available to be used, and you pull that together, you capture that again as this is the sources of potential collaboration, and who do they know within the client organization. And again, as I say, the partnership network, maybe they're both using a certain CRM system or some other type of partner and advisor. So gather all of that knowledge first is what I profess. So you've got your key account, you've got some existing relationships, you've got some existing projects, but take the time to pull all this together. And it may take a bit of time. That's why I call it panning for gold, because you have to spend the time to go through the detail to figure out, in the context of those identified executives and key buying personas that you originally found, how are you going to tackle this account short, medium, and long term? So that's really the premise of the catalyst for collaboration. So that's the way I'd frame this up, Phil, is like, how do you prepare yourself? And maybe you've heard a different approach to what I've just described. If you're doing a lot of this stuff already, that's great. But I evangelize a methodical way to gather this information. And you talk about, this is chess, not checkers, in this, the Americanism, that it takes time, it's strategic, and you need to be thoughtful, because I'm sure everybody on this call knows that just one relationship can make the difference between winning a significant deal and losing a deal. So that is really what this is about. And the stats at the beginning, where I talk about the impact that relationships can have. All of this feeds together, and it's this relationship first approach, and sort of huddle down, gather your team, who's the right team internally based on previous bids that you might have worked on, so that they can support you, and you figure out, like, who is my team on this account. And it won't necessarily be the people that naturally are aligned to you as in the general organization you're working in. There'll be others as well that you can bring for support. So that's a bit of a monologue there, Phil, but that's my sort of framing of collaboration when it comes to key accounts. And then for each of those items, you go into more detail, and you start to track this stuff and capture it, and then strategize around it.
I certainly recommend your book, Ryan. So for anyone who really wants to get into it. So, what I've found in some of the kind of client work that we've done, particularly with people selling complex solutions to large organizations, is often navigating internally is actually more difficult than navigating externally with the customer. And I was going to pose this question to Julia again about, sometimes it's difficult to know quite who is it within your own organization that you need to go to in order to get that. You talk about panning for gold, that fantastic idea or solution to a nutty problem, let's say, that the client has got. So is that a big part of what you do, Julia?
Yeah, absolutely, Phil. So what's really worked well in our business is, and it's also another globally recognized model, and called the pod structure. I've actually spoken about it in quite a few of my submissions for the masters. It's a model I particularly believe in, has worked really, really well for myself. And what it encompasses is, NTT Data is a massive company. We're currently merging 3 businesses at the moment into one. The challenges that comes with that is movement around individuals, IP, connections, relationships, etc. And what's worked really well is in a pod structure. What would happen is the business would assign an individual that is a subject matter expert within a particular area to an account manager, such as myself, and we would have a number of those that stretch across all of our entire value proposition, even to the point of legal individuals, compliance, etc. So we would actually have an entire team backing myself, and that is looking after a particular client base. So what the value of that is that you get to understand all of those individuals in that pod structure, get to understand the customer in detail. So we do joint account planning, and we go through iterations of discussions with the customer, and we agree that account plan with the customer. So these individuals will know that customer inside out, which is fantastic. Yeah. And that's helped me navigate a lot of, trying to get things done quickly within a global business. Extending that a little bit further, when you're dealing with global customers, you've got other regions to consider. So you need to have individuals aligned within other parts of the world, so that when opportunities come up, you can all link together and make it happen in good time for this customer.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I've worked with some absolutely amazing sort of engagement leads or key account managers over my career, and I'll never forget there was one particular opportunity with it was a renewal for a big FMCG client, and our client was criticized for perhaps being slightly complacent about the relationship over the last 5 years, I think it was, and that unless they were slightly more innovative, they may fail to get the renewal, and it was hundreds of millions of dollars. So it was a big deal. It was a big wake-up call, and I was struck. There was an account manager that was involved in this particular project, Brigitte. In fact, she was at GST on the panel, and she had this amazing ability to extend her network beyond what might have been considered the conventional pod structure, to find individuals that would add a diversity of thinking to the problem. And I remember we got a collection of people together in London for this workshop, and one of the people there was the head of supply chain for Hewlett Packard, which is quite a big, quite a big job. But I don't know how she managed to get him to come along, because one of the problems the client had was about supply chain, particularly in India. So she thought, let's get our head of supply chain into the board level person to come over. But actually, there was someone that was sort of sat in the room. He wasn't wearing a white coat, but it was almost like a white coat. He was a scientist and was working at their labs in Bristol. And no one quite knew what this person was doing there. But, the topic was innovation. So why not go to labs? The HP have got a big tradition in patent development and new technology development. You never know. There may be something that's happening in the lab that might be quite relevant for the client. And what was really interesting was, as we're sort of brainstorming, and this person at the back of the room was sort of an engineer, was terribly quiet. He said, look, it's maybe a silly idea, but there's this bit of technology that we're just about to launch called X. I can't remember what it was. And I just think that this client might be interested to come over to the lab to take a look. And actually that sort of little idea actually triggered a whole insight into the product roadmap of the technology company, which completely blew the mind of the client. So they could see the innovation, they could see where it was coming from, they could, they had these insights, but it was not a traditional member of an account team that came up with this one idea, this trigger, this catalyst for something that led on to something quite big later on. And I think the ability to orchestrate resources around your global account, in fact, a lot of people use that analogy of a conductor of an orchestra. That's sort of very much what the global account directors are trying to do, is knowing when do the strings come in, when does percussion come in, or whatever. I don't know, Ryan, if you've got any thoughts on what I've just shared with you.
Yeah, so this is a great example of the internal leg of the collaboration, isn't it? And thinking along the peripheral vision and in other directions, I guess, if there's more senior people coming in, but certainly breaking down that typical model of who's available to you and breaking a few things. We see a bit of that today in the political atmosphere, moving fast and breaking things. But if it's a case of what you're describing there, Phil, it's someone who's thinking to bring together the best of what the organization has internally, collaborating together, these fresh ideas. And as I said, one relationship can make the difference.
Yeah.
This person in the invisible white coat that came up with the lab suggestion, that's exactly the type of catalyst for an idea that then helps them to think differently. So I suppose you've got to be careful. It's not a case of like throwing a bunch of stuff and seeing what sticks. You've got to think it through. You've got to be methodical. Back to the point about the challenger sale, it is about the tactful audacity. It's coming up with something that, based on the knowledge, the experience, the research you've done, is a thoughtful idea. So very compelling way to operate. And I think we can all learn from that, and we can all go back and think like that in our own time or for our own accounts. And I guess what that actually enables is back to the first leg, which is the client. So if you are then going into a client with something which is not off the shelf or is not part of an RFP, it becomes a collaboration effort, or even like a co-creation effort. And that, in the name itself, is collaboration. And I guess if you can start to think like that, and if there's thinking strategically, if there's those types of opportunities that you can manufacture with the client, it's only going to make your position stronger within the organization. Much more difficult in this, the competitive nature of our business is others coming in for apple comparisons. So that's always something that comes from strong relationships, where there's trust, where there's good communication channels, all this stuff we know exists. So if you've got those types of relationships with specific people, in your client organizations, obviously leverage those to come up with customized co-creations for solutions. And again, that lends itself to a strong collaboration and a stronger position for you within that account.
There's a couple of questions that have come through. Is what you're describing, Ryan, a job for AI?
Yeah, so that, I'm guessing, I saw that one come through. That's why I put the specs back on. But yeah, that came through when I was describing the three legs. Certainly, when it comes to the research element, so if you're identifying the key execs and the key buying personas, you want to do some research about them. I'm using a bit of AI for that myself, trying to test that out. But I guess and if you've got internal systems, you've got software like IntraHive, it's got an Ask IntraHive feature similar to what we see with the agents today. So you can gather the insights around the existing relationships within that specific account. But I think part of the opportunity for people that are willing to put in the hard work, figuratively roll their sleeves up, is doing things that the AI isn't currently able to do. I mean, for example, now there's no AI doesn't work on LinkedIn, so you can't stick a LinkedIn profile into an AI. And correct me if I'm wrong. I'd love to find out I'm wrong on this, but and ask me to summarize this relationship, summarize the key parts of that profile. There's limitations to what you can access through digital means, certainly with LinkedIn and other types of software. But the point I'm trying to make here is this is a complicated and difficult, time-consuming process. AI can certainly help, but because of that, it means that you are going to be, there's very few of you that's going down that path. And I think the way to differentiate yourself in today's market is to be doing things that no one else is doing. And I think when it comes to what's available on the internet regards preparation for meetings, before, I'm sure there's people on this call, and certainly with grey hair like mine, that used to differentiate themselves by the amount of research they did. But that's a Me Too thing now. Everybody's coming with that. AI's got all of that now. So what are you going to do? I'd argue it's the relationship piece. It's the competitive intelligence piece. So if you can get conversations organized with people that work within the organization or recently left or willing to share the org structure and the competitive landscape and the priorities of different individuals that are important to you, they're the key golden pieces of information, which I think are going to make the difference for you when it comes to those key exec meetings that the others that are using AI certainly won't have. And that's the differentiator at the moment for me.
Coming back to something that Julia mentioned around intelligence gathering and so on, and this idea of relationships, one of the things that I saw being done, which I consider quite innovative, and you could only really do this on opportunities that warrant it because it's an investment, was that we thought, who knows the client sort of business strategy and structures the best? Yeah, who are the people in the out there in the broader community? And we thought what sort of analysts are, because they're often in, particularly for public quoted companies, analysts actually have relationships actually with the board. They talk to the CEOs, they talk to the CFOs, they are very close because they obviously publish their own points of view about the success or not of a company. Now, this is not something that, and of course, IDC, you can download these analyst papers if you have access to these. But what we did was we invited the analyst into the workshops. We actually said, we don't want to get the report, we'd invite them in. Now, then it's not part of what they normally do. So what we did was we offered to support charities that they wanted. We were desperate. We're working on an opportunity. It could be Reuters, it could be Unilever, any one of these. But we'd find an analyst who had a really strong point of view, and we'd just phone them up and say, "Would you mind joining a workshop?" Some participated very eagerly. Some said no. But what we found in an hour of having an analyst is you get so much insight, not just into the business strategy, but actually you do get some insights into the relationships and the people and the personalities. So I would say that maybe, Ryan, this is an example of actually doing something that AI can go and choose an analyst report, and you can read it, and that will help. This is an example, I think, of doing one step more. And it's like having an MBA in an hour on an account. It was absolutely extraordinary, the amount of information and knowledge. And I remember we were working on a deal with a big recruitment agency, a global recruitment agency, and we were all thinking about who are the agency's customers. Who do they sell to? Trying to work out what's the win strategy for them. And the analyst said, actually, you're looking in the wrong area. It's not the clients that are important. It's the supply chain. It's where do they get the temporary staff. And that completely changed the priority for the particular solutions we're looking at. We were looking in the wrong area for ideas that could help differentiate our value proposition. It was a supply chain issue, not a customer win issue for them, because they had plenty of customers. Their challenge was getting enough. They're a staffing agency, getting enough staff. That was the key for them. So it's quite interesting. These insights you sometimes don't pick up by picking up an analyst report. It's just trying to do one thing more than anyone else is going to do that gives you that little jewel, that nugget of information that can help. Julia, I see you smiling there. I don't know if you think I'm smoking something here, or what do you think it's...
Absolutely, I agree with that. And another element to that, Phil, is also your partner ecosystem. I think, in my field of work, that is, one of the most, outside of the customer, that is the most important network that you can leverage. So those customers, those partners, from a vendor perspective, would have a lot more insight. And it's interesting how, a client would share certain information with a partner like NTT Data versus a vendor in the market. They're driving very different agendas, and having those good relationships with those vendors in the market can help you understand the customer in a little bit more detail. They give you the insight, and they also can support you with those innovative ideas on maybe approaching things a little bit differently to how you've been doing them.
That's great. And that was the third area that we're going to talk about, wasn't it? We talked about clients, we talked about internal, and now we talk about the broader ecosystem as well, and the importance of having those sort of partner networks that you can plug into. I guess I've mentioned the financial community. The analyst community could be a community of partners you could draw upon. It could be the channel partners that you have, Julia, and other partners that are within your system. Ryan, do you have a point of view at all about the partner sort of structures in terms of relationship mapping and so on?
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations have a partner ecosystem. So that is sometimes an untapped source of knowledge, but you have to leverage that yourself for your own benefit. Often the team in place is there to support you. So if you're trying to explore this external leg, as we're calling it, you've got that partner, you've got the advisor, you've got these formal organizations, I guess, and you've got the analyst community. I'd also, and you follow, whether you're in a big organization that has different teams that sort of manage those relationships, or whether you've got to do the tribal knowledge thing of sort of piece together what their tech stack is, or their partners, or who they're working with. And if you can marry those with your own internal partners, do some detective work, again, back to putting the legwork in to piece this together. So all of that is the hard work I talk about. But then I'd also suggest, if you've got the time, because this can sometimes throw up quite a few names when I do this analysis, is people that used to work at your client target organization. So sometimes you'll get a situation where if you're leveraging your network and they work there at the time, they're a bit more guarded. Obviously, depending on the strength of the relationship, they will be happy to to intro or share some information, but sometimes people that have left are more willing to share details that matter. So don't overlook that as well. And obviously on LinkedIn and software like IntroHive, you can uncover these relationships to leverage. And it's a question of going through, used to work at so and so, first degree connections, things like that, and figure out who's there, have a chat to them, see the competitor landscape as well. So that's something to consider. And yeah, so that's probably the key components, I guess, are the areas to piece together when you're looking at that third leg, in my opinion.
Yeah, brilliant. I can see we've had a few more questions that have come through, and we're in the sort of Q&A phase, I think, of the webinar as well. So any questions? Yeah, I think I've got some thank yous here. I think, which is very nice. Tristan, I also think the vendors could gain masses of knowledge their partners have to offer. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right. I think that sometimes, yeah, clients may be, what's the word, suspicious of vendors because they're very focused on what they do, whereas I guess partners, could be more objective in the way that they're solving client problems. And so getting a vendor on your side there is invaluable, and yeah, getting them to help with deals that you're closing. Yeah, brilliant. And was there another one that I missed, Tristan? Oh no, sorry, I've got so many messages now. My list
got one here. Any thoughts on the role relationships play in service failure situations? Interesting one.
Can we talk about failure? Actually, I'd love to talk about it, but yeah, Ryan, are you going to take that one?
Yeah, look, I think judging by the question, you've been involved in projects, and if there's certain people on the call been involved in delivering projects, I'm 25 years and I'm yet to experience one that goes perfectly to plan, to be perfectly honest. So maybe that's just me, but I think they are always fraught with issues, misunderstandings, miscommunications, stakeholders coming in and out. So for me, all that's left is obviously the contract if you need to grab for that, but it's certainly the relationships, the clarity of the relationships, and back to the stuff we started with around trust and this being genuine and being honest and the transparency about how you're feeling. You've got to have that, and go back to my doctorate research is about telling the unvarnished truth. So I think the problem I saw, if I just give it a 30-second summary here, is when I spoke to these CXOs as part of the doctor, I interviewed a whole bunch of them, big shots from JP Morgan, Amex, Sainsbury's, BP. And what they want is the unvarnished truth. This word kept coming up a lot, this phrase. So it was tell them how it is. If it's not going well, sooner the better. So I think that's where the relationship has to hold true. And it's not a blame game, is it? Because we're a partnership and we have to get to the bottom of it. We have to solve the problem. And sometimes in a vendor, you might be thinking we need to keep this quiet and we'll try and fix it. I think they don't appreciate that. They want to know what's happening, because if there's issues to service delivery, obviously there are bigger problems down the line for them on their business, managing their business and their clients. So in the spirit of a partnership and relationship, you have to be transparent, and I think they appreciate that. Bad news is good if it's brought in the right spirit.
Yeah, Luke Skinner at GST shared a great example. Actually, it wasn't so much a service-related example, but it was connected with the proposal that they just submitted, and they realised they completely misscoped it technically. Do you remember what he said? And the global account director had to phone up the client and say, look, I'm really sorry, but we've completely misscoped it, which is going to result in us having to submit a completely different proposal. I think this was at quite a late stage of getting the proposal over the line. And Luke made the point that the global account manager, who's based in the Netherlands, just gave it, just like you said, as it was. There was no trying to hide the fact, accepted the apology was made. But what was interesting was his comment that the client, and this goes back to trust and relationships, the client in this case completely got it, completely understood. It was never referred to again in other conversations, the mistake that was actually made. If I can use the word, shit happens sometimes. Someone made a mistake, someone owned up, and it was dealt with in a very, very professional way. But I think the reaction of the client's interesting because of the trust and respect that had been built up. You're able to deal with those, if you like, service-related issues, in a much better way. Now, I realize we're getting to the end of the session. Yes, thanks, Siddharth, the power of relationships. I don't know if we've got time. How are we doing, George, with time? We've got one more minute. And there's a question from Will. I deliberately avoided Will, didn't I? What was Will's question? How do you quantify a strength of a relationship with an account? It's based on seniority, number of product services sold. Are there KPIs that you could measure on relationships? Got a minute for that? I don't know, Julia?
I think that's a difficult one. Relationships are quite a personal element. What I will say, though, is just connecting back to your point earlier around the challenges that you have. One area where I see where we do have some service challenges that can potentially come into a customer base is the transition from moving from the account management team into the project management team. I think that's why it's really, really important to have relationships on both levels, because sometimes your account management team has to hand over a project, and the level of relationship can sometimes lower because your project teams don't have the same level of relationship, and they're actually dealing with the same customer on a day-to-day basis. So being able to maintain that in a structure, I think is also very important.
That's a great point, Julia. Really, really good point. Yeah, it's not just landing the deal, it's adopting, isn't it? And so on. Ryan, do you want to add anything to that final question of Will's?
Yeah,
we should have addressed Will's question earlier, perhaps. It's quite a meaty one.
You've got it's like Julia suggested, relationships are difficult to quantify. I think obviously it's difficult for me not to mention intra-hive. We measure the quality based on volume of data and the different components to that communication. Beyond that, you've got the nuances of that relationship, stuff you and I have talked about in the past, Phil. Service level history, like the question was about service quality. How successful have you been? How the SLA? So beyond the basic metrics of the relationship, like the activity level, the nuances behind that. How are you helping them support their objectives, deliver to their objectives? That's the crux of any real relationship in a business context. You've got to help them achieve their priorities, as simple as that.
Very good. Well, I think we could have gone on a bit longer, but we don't have time, sadly. Actually, there are two just messages at the very end. So thank you, everyone, for joining. I think this will be published on the Sales Transformation podcast as well. So look out for that. And yeah, thanks very much, Ryan and Julia, for joining. It's been great having this discussion with you both. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.